Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be centered around the Master Transcendent. For 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue, it's a legendary artifact creature, mutant 2/4, with when the Master Transcendent enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters and tap. Put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3. It loses its other colors and creature types. So ever since the moment this card was spoiled, I thought it looked really interesting, so I decided to build a deck around it. Now, this one is a little bit of a unique one because obviously we're going to be building around rad counters, but there's really not that many cards that do that, and we have cut some of the worst ones as well, because some of them I don't think are quite playable enough. Outside of rad counters themselves, we're also building with a bit of a mill theme in mind, because of course the Master's ability works very well with cards that have been milled. Proliferate is going to be another of the side themes of the deck, seeing as it can help with the rad counters that we're going to be putting on our opponents. And finally, we also have a couple of ways to untap the Master so that we can steal a bunch of different things with his ability. Seeing as it sets the stats to 3/3, we've included a bunch of creatures that get their value more from their abilities than from their stats. Obviously, we can't control that as much with our opponent's creatures, but there's so many ETBs in Commander these days that I think we should be fine. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off with Ancient Frank Horrigan. This is pretty cool because it gives you 2 proliferate triggers as soon as it ETBs, and then whenever we attack with it, it gets indestructible and 2 more proliferate triggers. So this is just a really solid card. It's also a very good one to reanimate with the Master, seeing as we don't really care if it's a 3/3. Biophagus is a good way to ramp into the Master early on, and since we have a bunch of proliferate, the counters can be relevant. Bloatfly Swarm works very well with our proliferate theme. It's going to come in as a 5/5 flower, and then whenever it takes damage, we're basically going to prevent that damage and give each player a rad counter for each counter that we've removed. This means that proliferate works really well with everything this card is doing. Tanker Bloom is obviously great. Destroying an artifact or enchantment are really useful, and having the option to proliferate is also good. Captain Ungathroat is going to work really well with what the deck is trying to do. We don't have that many horrors in the deck, but just the fact that he can reanimate a card that was milled from our opponents is really good. Consuming Aberration is amazing in this deck. We are looking to mill our opponents as much as possible, and this mills more than almost any other card. Diluvian Primordial is going to work very nicely since we're milling so much, and it's going to get to cast 3 cards from an opponent's graveyard. It's also really good to hit with the Master's ability. Feral Ghoul works nicely with our proliferate theme, particularly since when it dies it gives everybody a bunch of rad counters, which is solid. Glowing One is a really annoying card because they're not going to want to block it because of the death touch, but if they don't, they get 4 rad counters. But not only that, it's also going to gain us life whenever anyone mills a non-land card. Gyruda Doom of Depths is going to work nicely and reanimate a creature for us, and it also fuels our commander. Halo Forager is kind of like a Snapcaster Mage, but for anybody's graveyard, which is really nice. Infesting Radroach is incredibly annoying, particularly if we can get a couple of counters on it, and it's so hard to permanently remove because it just keeps coming back from our graveyard to our hand. Myalert Queen is a really strong draw engine, even though it only triggers once per turn, and putting rad counters on our opponent is obviously very good. Nightkin Ambusher can get the rad counter train started, and then it's a really good source of damage because it becomes unblockable. Raoul Troubleshooter is similar to our commander, but we can actually get to play any card, not just creatures, from our graveyard with this. Screeching Scourgebeast is one of the best finishes we have in this deck. It's going to give everybody rad counters, which is really good, and then whenever somebody mills a bunch of non-land cards, we're going to get a ton of 2/2 zombie mutant creature tokens. Sepulchral Primordial is a great finisher that can steal 3 creatures from our stacked opponents' graveyards. Shieldred Whispering One is slow, but if it's left unchecked, it can run away with the game very easily, particularly if we get it down early with our commander. Sludge Titan is a new addition from Ravnica Clue Edition that I think is really solid, particularly in a deck like this. It's going to mill 5 cards whenever it ETBs or attacks, which is incredible, and we get to return a land and or creature from them to our hand. Strong the Brutish Thespian turns all of the radiation life loss into life gain, which is obviously fantastic. Sir Conrad the Grim is an incredible finisher in this deck, seeing as we're milling so much. Not only that, but whenever we use our commander's ability, it's also going to trigger, which is amazing. Tato Farmer is fantastic in a deck like this. We're going to be incidentally milling quite a few lands, so being able to put them into play tapped is really good. The Gitrog Monster works really well with what the deck is trying to do, because again, we are going to incidentally be milling some lands, and each time we mill one with this out, we're going to draw a card, which is really powerful. The Wise Mothman works really nicely by giving everybody rad counters whenever ETBs or attacked, and then we can start putting counters on different creatures whenever we mill a non-land card, which is really good. Throwing Bird is a classic that's going to work very well in any proliferate strategy, and we are putting a lot of counters on stuff in this deck. Unshakable Tail is a card that I've been really impressed with from the precons of Call of Mana. It's a lot of repeatable value that's very difficult to permanently deal with, and it's also going to give you a ton of clues in this deck since you're milling so much. Vengeful Pharaoh is an oldie but a goodie. It's going to be very difficult for your opponents to attack when you have this in your graveyard, and since we have so much mill, it's very easy to get it back in your graveyard from the top of your library. Vexing Radical is essentially another copy of Thrumming Bird that's even better in this deck because sometimes you can put rad counters on people. And Wonder is a surprisingly good finisher, seeing as it's going to give all of our creatures flying as long as it's in a graveyard. Moving on to sorceries, we have Charnel Serenade from the Call of Mana precons. This is incredibly powerful in a deck like this because we get to keep surveilling and returning stuff from our graveyard to the battlefield. Expand the Sphere gives us the best of both options. We can either double ramp with it or double proliferate, or one of each, which is great. From the Catacombs is a card that I really like in a lot of different decks, and it's so good in this one in particular because even if we mill it, we get to keep playing it from the graveyard over and over, which is very nice. Incarnation Technique is one of my favorite cards in Commander. Being able to play this early and milling a bunch of stuff that you can then reanimate with your commander, as well as getting 2 creatures back from your own graveyard, it feels really disgusting. Nuclear Fallout is an excellent board wipe that's going to give everybody a bunch of rad counters. The fact that this is twice -X/-X actually makes it really strong. Rise of the Dark Realms is incredibly good as a finisher, particularly since we're going to be milling so much in this deck. If they don't have a board wipe, the game is basically over. And Unnatural Restoration is a nice recursion spell that's also going to proliferate. Moving on to instants, we have Atomize, which works very nicely by giving us unconditional removal that's also going to proliferate. Burn in the Lock is often going to be an unconditional removal or counter spell in this deck with all of the milling we're doing. Experimental Augury gives us a nice little bit of card selection with proliferate tacked on. And Reverse the Polarity is another of my favorite cards that works really well, giving us the option to finish the game by giving all of our stuff unblockable. Moving on to artifacts, we have Lightning Greaves to protect our commander and allow him to use his ability immediately. Contagion Clasp gives us a nice way to repeatedly proliferate. Reconcraft Theta is a really nice new one that gives us a creature that can grow bigger with all of our proliferate effects. Staff of Completion allows us to do a lot of different things, but we're mostly going to be using it for the proliferate. Sting the Glinting Dagger is very powerful in this deck, seeing as we can untap our commander a bunch of different times to get his ability many times per turn cycle. And the Ever-Flowing Well works nicely by being a card draw spell that also mills us. For enchantments, we have Case of the Shifting Visage, which is a really solid one by allowing us to fill up our graveyard, and then when we solve it, which isn't that difficult, we get to copy every non-legendary creature spell that we play, which is insane. Inexorable Tide is going to turn any spell we cast into a proliferate. Intruder Alarm works very well with our commander, particularly if we have a high rad count on our opponents, because we can just steal a creature from their graveyard, it'll come in, untap our commander, steal another creature, etc, etc. Struggle for Project Purity has 2 very solid modes. I think the first one is going to be best most of the time to draw a bunch of cards, but the other one, dissuading attacks and giving people rad counters, is also good. And Vault 12, the Necropolis, is really good. It's going to give everybody rad counters, then you're going to get a bunch of zombie tokens, and then finally you're going to put a bunch of counters on all of those zombies. So this is a really good finisher if it gets to the 3rd step. Finally, for battles, we are running the Invasion of Amonkhet. This has always been one of my favorite battles, and it's really solid in this deck. Everybody's going to mill 3, and you're going to draw a card whilst your opponents are all going to discard. That's going to fill up their graveyards very handily, and then when you flip this, you just get to copy the best thing in any graveyard, which is really good. So there you have it. That has been the Master Transcendent deck tech. I can't wait to get my hands on these cards so I can put this together and start slamming games with the rad counters, which seems so fun. I'm sure I'll end up refining this list, but I think it's a good starting point for this commander. But what do you think? Are there any cards that I missed? Any cards that you think I shouldn't have added? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.